Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so my video today is called No, Really, Peace and Safety, um, which basically what I wanted to talk about was, I didn't understand why when people are talking about the war that nobody recognizes that this is the peace and safety war. Um, the war that comes after the peace and safety. Okay. Um, and so I talked about this in some of my previous videos. So um, on August 9th, we read about in the Wall Street Journal about President Biden's Saudi deal. Okay. And especially in the month of September, everybody was talking about this Saudi deal and just talking about how it's going to change the face of the Middle East and, um, just bring peace like there's never been before. And especially Netanyahu was making a lot of speeches all over the place talking about this Saudi deal. He was all excited about it. Um, and the Saudi guy, too. He was on September 20th, he was on Fox doing an interview talking about the Saudi deal. So it was just like going like gangbusters and moving forward and everything. Okay. And then what happened? Then the war hit and it put a stop to this Saudi quote unquote peace deal. Okay. Um, so, um, so definitely this verse, I think we are definitely seeing a fulfillment of this verse that says, while they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. And so I definitely think too that this war is part of the labor pains, okay? And so basically, like a woman with child, it's like um, the church is getting ready to birth their Messiah, like Jesus is getting ready to come back. Okay, so there's the labor pains would be like the church, the birthing of Messiah, labor pains. Okay, um, so anyway, so it's just interesting to me that um, I really haven't heard anyone kind of make a connection to the peace and safety. I mean, I could be missing it, but so I wanted to make sure that you know we make that clear. I mean, it was really interesting because um, especially um, so let's go over here. Let's see. Yeah, especially okay. So on September 20th, that's when Biden met with Netanyahu, and they were discussing the Saudi deal and the Palestinians. Okay. Um, So what was really interesting was this whole time that Netanyahu was, talking to these people about the Saudi deal and stuff, things were like getting, um, things were kind of heating up in Gaza. And so it's kind of interesting because there's been this whole conversation of like, how did they miss this? How did they not know that Hamas was going to come and attack Israel on October 7th? How did they miss that? Well, the fact that they miss it too is even more interesting when you see that they had like 3 weeks of turmoil with Gaza. Okay, there was all this rioting on the border, and they were throwing Molotov cocktails and incendiary balloons, um, and um, so that was kind of interesting because um, um, yeah, so anyways, I think we saw a fulfillment of Esther 3:15 because it says the couriers went out impelled by the king's command while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa. So that part of the verse could be um that the Palestinians and Hamas, they were spreading the king's command would have been, that they wanted to kill the Jews, okay? In the rest of the chapter. And so they were spreading, you know, like it was interesting because they talked about that Hamas like probably knew not to like talk about it over the cell phones because Israel would be listening, and so a lot of this was probably spread by word of mouth, to prepare for this day, to go against the Jews. Okay. Um, and so the rest of the verse says, and while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. So, right when, okay, so the king and Haman could be Netanyahu and Biden. And so, right when they were sitting down discussing the Saudi deal and the Palestinians, at the, that was on the outskirts of the UN, meeting that they were having, where all the top leaders came in. I mean, that's why Netanyahu got it together with Erdogan, and, you know, everyone was out for the UN meeting. I don't remember what it's called, the UN General Assembly. And anyways, so while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. So the whole time, while Biden was meeting with Netanyahu, there was 3 weeks of turmoil with Gaza before October 7th. I mean, they even like shut the doors of Gaza, the border with Gaza, for like 2 weeks during that time. So yeah, kind of interesting. Um, um, so sudden destruction. I mean, definitely Hamas came quickly and unexpectedly on October 7th. Okay. Um, and okay, so the other thing too I wanted to say about peace and safety, destruction will come upon them suddenly. I also think, okay, so what I kind of believe about prophecy is there's very possible multiple fulfillments. And so I do think there's going to be a multiple fulfillment, because I kind of think that now that the war's been going on, we have all these people that are saying peace and safety in a way, because what they're saying is ceasefire now. Okay. And so these are all like the enemies of Israel, um, and the people that support the Palestinians. And so they're calling for a ceasefire. Like, they're not aware of the fact that Israel needs to deal with Hamas and take care of Hamas. I mean, they can't just do a ceasefire, because Hamas is just going to be emboldened to keep doing what they do, to kill people. I mean, it's a really tough situation. And so I think too, we're going to see sudden destruction on the enemies of Israel, that are saying peace and safety. Okay. So anyways, and what I believe about the war. Okay, so I believe that the Hamas attack on Israel was judgment / chastisement on Israel for their sins. And then I believe now God is using Netanyahu to bring judgment on Hamas. And then, but then at some point, and God always says, like, the destroyer will come and destroy until he's taken away. And so for as long as, I don't know how long Netanyahu's going to be around, and how long God will allow them to fight in Gaza and bring judgment to Gaza. Okay. But then I think when that's done, then we're going to see Trump is going to bring judgment on Biden. Okay. Because basically, so Netanyahu, basically was, I mean, he was willing to go along with this Saudi deal, and he was kind of delusional, because he wasn't aware of the fact, or he wasn't, I mean, he thought they could make a deal with the Saudis without dealing with the Palestinians, but he wasn't really listening to the Saudi guy, because the Saudi guy's like, no, one of our, main requirements is that they, make a solution with the Palestinians, And so it was kind of interesting to just see Netanyahu was kind of saying his thing and the Saudis were saying their things, and it was different. They had different understandings of this Saudi deal. Um, and so, um, okay, so this verse in First Thessalonians 5, these verses, okay, so it says, "For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you like a thief." So I found this one verse in Deuteronomy where you could apply the concept of thief to Hamas, okay? Because it says in Deuteronomy 24, it says, "If a man is caught kidnapping any of his countrymen of the sons of Israel, and he deals with him violently or sells him, then that thief shall die. So you shall purge the evil from among you." Okay. Um, so what did Hamas do? They definitely kidnapped some of them, or and they dealt with a lot of them very violently. Okay. Um, so, and God calls on his people to purge the evil from among them. Okay. So, I mean, a lot of people in this world are just comfortable with letting evil. I mean, they don't even have that word evil in their vocabulary. They think everyone's basically good inside. And so that's why there's a lot of, I mean, not totally, but it's kind of a religion of, so the Palestinians, which that name's a misnomer too. The reason why the people want Palestinians to remain is they kind of have this religion where they think they're doing good because they're looking after the Palestinians. Okay, when they're actually kind of fighting against God in that respect. Okay. Um, so we see that religion kind of like just has grown up, like it's kind of like a cult. I mean, so now we see all the people like protesting in the streets, and they all think they're, like righteous, or, um, looking after the little guy protesting in the streets about, ceasefire now in Israel and free the Palestinians and all that kind of stuff. Um, so hopefully that kind of made sense what I was saying. And so really what's happening then is that people are turning against Israel because of this religion that they follow. Which is take care of the Palestinians, and then they have this false belief that the Jewish people are oppressors and colonialists, like occupiers. That's the word that they use. That they're occupying the land. But whose land is it? Who really has the history? The other thing too, while this war is going on, I really recommend that you find some sources that really love Israel, because even in the mainstream media, it's slanted toward the Palestinians. We hear more about what's happening in Gaza than in Israel. Okay. And so it's causing people to have more sympathy for the Gazans than for Israel. I mean, because there's, people aren't hearing, one, they're not really remembering the massacre that happened on October 7th. Um, and they're not hearing about how the Israelites, I mean, the Israelis are having to, they've evacuated both in the north and the south. And so their lifestyle's really been upended, and then there's all the family members of the people who are still being held hostage, and so we don't really hear their stories. Okay. Um, so we're not hearing about the suffering of the Jewish people during this time. Um, and um, and it's been a long time. I mean, it's really gotten uncomfortable for them to live in Israel because of all the terrorist attacks that they have to deal with. Um, and definitely after this attack happened on October 7th, they were like, okay, this is just, I can't raise my children here. It's just not a good place, and so they're really kind of at the end of the rope with the terrorism. Um, I mean, because there's the terrorism from Gaza, there's the terrorism from Hezbollah, and now during this war, we've been seeing um, so rockets are coming from Syria, um, which are other um, proxies, Iran proxies in Syria, and then I mean, so even the Houthi rebels in Yemen are sending rockets over to Israel. Um, which that's another thing where they were saying peace and safety in Yemen. Um, they thought so. Saudi Arabia has been having problems with Yemen for years now, but they thought they were kind of like on the edge of kind of making a ceasefire in Yemen. Um, um, and then it kind of fell apart like at the exact same time as this Hamas attack in Israel. And so there's not peace in Yemen. So that's been going on too. So there's it's kind of interesting that it's I mean, when you talk about multiple fulfillments of prophecy, I mean it's really true. Because um stuff could be happening in other countries too that we're not even aware of that are fulfilling prophecy. I mean, another thing with the peace and safety was um so there was actually, so the night before the attack of Hamas, they were having a concert. There was young people in Israel that were having a peace concert. Um and so a lot of them got killed by Hamas. I mean, so it's just really tragic. Um um anyways, so the so we're reading in these verses about a thief in the night, and then so it says the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. So if Hamas is a type of thief, we know that Hamas came quickly and unexpectedly. So Jesus will come quickly and unexpectedly. Like when people aren't really ready, when they're focusing on something else. Okay. Um, and so no one knew the day or hour. Okay, so we hear that verse quoted all the time, but people always apply it to the rapture. Okay, but I don't believe in the rapture. I believe in the second coming. Um, and the verse is really taken out of context when they apply it to the rapture, because there's really not anything in that. At least the verse right above it isn't talking about the rapture, because in Matthew 24, 35, which is the verse above no one knowing the day or hour, it says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And then it says, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Okay, so I brought in Haggai 2:6, because in there we read about God talking about shaking the heavens and the earth. Okay, what's interesting in Haggai 2 is it starts out with talking about the 7th month and the 21st day. So that is actually the 7th day of Sukkot. Okay, so that would have been the day right before this attack by Hamas. Okay, and so on that day, God speaks to Haggai and he talks about, so let me find those verses. Um, let's see, I don't know how quickly I can find it. So he talks about, like, who are you that have seen, oh, here, I found it, praise the Lord. Okay, so who is left among you who saw this temple in its former glory? And how do you see it now? Does it not seem to you like nothing in comparison? And then, because And so he said this on the 21st of the seventh month, on the Hebrew calendar to Haggai. Okay. And then he says in verse 7, he says, I will shake all the nations and they will come with the wealth. Oh no, it's verse 6. For thus says the Lord of hosts, once more in a little while. So a little while was like really fast. Okay. So if God was speaking to us on October 6th, it happened really fast on October 7th. God says, once more in a little while, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth, the sea also, and the dry land. Um, and so, um, um, and so what I believe in prophecy is I think heaven is a shadow of Israel and earth is a shadow, a prophetic shadow of America. Okay. And so, but actually, like in this verse, it says, heaven and earth will pass away. It'd be like, the people in Israel that don't belong to God will pass away. And the people in in America that don't belong to God will pass away. But my words will not pass away. When we know that Jesus is the word of God. Okay, so all the people connected to Jesus will not pass away. Okay, that's why it's kind of weird that they talk about that we don't want to be left behind, because we actually do want to be left behind. Okay. Because the people that are left behind will be with Jesus. Okay. So they kind of got it backwards. Okay. Um, and so what's interesting is, and so I think we've actually seen the first part of this, so we're seeing the war in Israel, the war in heaven. Um, and we actually read about that too in Revelation. Um, and um and then but then there's the second fulfillment, the war in America. Okay. And so it says no one knew the day or the hour. So I believe like the day is, the day that Israel got attacked, and then the hour, because the hour is kind of like the hour of the final judgment. The hour relates to, I have a video slide that talks about this. The hour relates to the judgment of Babylon. And so the next step would be the hour. Okay, but no one knows the hour either. So we're going to be surprised by that. Okay. And so I think another reason why no one knew the day that Israel was going to get attacked was this deluding influence that I believe especially was on Netanyahu. Okay. And, and we read about the deluding influence. So in Second Thessalonians, we're told that God's gonna put a deluding influence on the people in the last days. Okay, and so I definitely think like in multiple fulfillments, because I think there was a deluding influence when Obama was president. On his followers, and then a deluding influence on Trump followers, and then and then um um and then I think now there's like a deluding influence in the anti-Israel protesters. Okay. Of course you could say that they'd be like Obama followers. Um so and so we see this deluding influence on Netanyahu. The way he was talking about this peace deal, he was very deluded into thinking that this was going to just change how they lived in Israel. Really, it was peace without the Messiah. It was peace. They thought they were going to be able to bring about peace by their own efforts. Okay. Anyways, so let's read these verses in Second Thessalonians. It said, let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Do you not remember that while I was still with you, I was telling you these things? For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. For this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence so that they will believe what is false, in order that they all may be judged who did not believe the truth, but took pleasure in wickedness. So, so God says, let no one deceive you, especially in these last days. And don't be deceived that, the earlier verses are, that the coming of the Lord like happened earlier. That would be like the people that are thinking, we're bringing peace through other Messiah type figures, like false Messiah type figures, like Biden is bringing peace or Trump is bringing peace, or and so so don't be deceived in that way. Okay, so the coming of Jesus will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed. So I'm wondering if another apostasy, so people fell away during Obama, people fell away during Trump, but now during this war, we're seeing people really kind of fall away again in protest against Israel. Okay, so another apostasy. Okay, so that's happening. And then it talks about the man of lawlessness being revealed. And so what's interesting to me is that this whole time while this war is going on, we've been seeing Trump's court dealings this whole time. Okay, so Trump's indictment started at Passover, and they've been, continuing until now. Okay, and so I definitely think he's a man of lawlessness. Some of these verses about the man of lawlessness, I think sometimes could apply to Netanyahu too. Okay, because he wanted to change the law in Israel. Okay, I really think they're really similar. I think they're the two witnesses. They're the two legs of iron. Um, um, you know, um, and so we see Trump like he takes his seat in court, and acts like he didn't do anything wrong and that they're out to get him. Like, it says displaying himself as being God, but, I wonder if the translation could also work as displaying himself as like being a Messiah type, because Trump does do that, where he does kind of act like he's the suffering Messiah. Okay. And so the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he's taken out of the way. So applying that to Trump, so right now we have the courts in America restraining Trump. Okay. Especially they're trying to put a gag order on him, not that it's really working. But Biden's also a type of restrainer on Trump, because Biden's the president, and so, Trump's not able to be president like he likes. So in a way, God's using Biden to put a type of restraint on Trump. Okay. But at some point, Biden's going to be taken out of the way, and God's going to allow Trump to return to some form of power. Okay. But then I also, when I read this too, I thought about like in Israel. So similar stuff, maybe is happening over in Israel with Netanyahu. That kind of the restrainer in Israel could have been this reasonableness. I don't know what you call it, law or something that was written in the books of Israel, where if the court there didn't like something that the prime minister did, if they thought it was unreasonable, they could put a stop to it. Well, Netanyahu got rid of that. Okay, he did not want to be restrained, okay, by this reasonableness. I don't know what to call it, bill, factor, whatever. And so, so that has already been taken away from Israel. Okay. Anyways, and then so, it goes on to say, for this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence so that they will believe what is false, in order that they all may be judged who did not believe the truth but took pleasure in wickedness. So, God's just going to allow delusion, to just continue to grow on the wicked, okay? Um, so that they will believe what is false, So we're definitely see the people that are pro-Palestinians really believing a lot of false things about the Palestinians, about the war in Israel. We saw so the hospital thing was a good example, a very good example of, they said that Israel bombed this hospital, and then it turned out that Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they actually, since um, the Islamic Jihad, they're kind of poor, so their missiles aren't as good as Hamas's missiles, and so they do actually end up dropping a bunch of them in Gaza, which is really stupid, but that's what they do. And so they were actually the ones that dropped this bomb. Okay, but Al Jazeera from Qatar, since they're kind of a propaganda wing for the Palestinians, they reported on it and said Israel was the one that dropped this bomb, and they, just hyped up the lies, of the situation, and then probably have never come back, to say, oh, sorry, we were wrong, because they are very pro-Palestinian. Um, so I was gonna say something else about that. What was I gonna say? So yeah, I mean, so that would be an example of a. Oh, one of the things I was gonna say too is that I actually heard this one guy. I don't know who said this, but um, it was when I was listening to about the war in Israel, that they said anything that comes out of Gaza is just propaganda. Okay, so you have to take everything that you hear about Gaza and the Palestinians with a grain of salt. Like, you have to be really careful, because the Hamas is very good with theater. Okay, like they fight the war on two fronts. Okay, they fight the war with the sword, but they also fight the war with the tongue. Like, they're very good at propaganda. Okay, and so some of the videos that come out of Gaza, I think, are staged. Like I saw a video today where they were supposedly standing next to a bunch of dead bodies, but that could have all been set up. Okay. Um, and then there was another video that I saw where this guy was supposedly crying about his family was all gone. But I was looking at this video and it's all men there. And it's like, well, if families really are in this area, why aren't I seeing any of them? It's like, I mean, it's not like just the women and children got killed, you know. And so I think the families had left this area and only the men were left. And so I didn't believe that video either. I thought it was very staged. Okay, so you have to be careful. Okay. Um, so they're very good at, staging things like that. And so even the number that we're hearing about how many people supposedly got killed in Gaza. I mean, it was interesting because I was watching an interview with Biden, and they had asked him about this number. They're like, well, what do you think of the fact that this many Palestinians have gotten killed? And he's like, I mean, even Biden said, like, I don't believe any number coming out of Gaza or whatever. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I was like, if even Biden knows not to believe the number coming out of Gaza, then we shouldn't believe that number. Um, so I think it's all, set up. It's all a stage. Um, um, so then, so God's using these quote unquote signs coming out of Gaza to add to this deluding influence on the wicked. Okay. So I wrote in here, like, two delusions would be the peace delusion that like Netanyahu was believing, and then the pro Palestinian people are have their delusions about the Palestinians. But it's interesting because I think there's a lot of overlap, um, with the peace belief because um, it like Netanyahu believing that we can just come up with peace by getting along with like Netanyahu basically what he believed is if if Israel can make normalization deals with the rest of the Middle East, then eventually the Palestinians would jump on board. That he has actually said that is really what he believes. Okay, and so it's a delusion that you think that wicked people are going to change their mind. Um, you know, like I mean, because really, what he's looking at the economic aspect of it, and so he just thought if okay, the Palestinians saw that all these Arab countries were normalizing with Israel, and they're all like um, just in happy camp with all these economic benefits and technological benefits, then definitely, the Palestinians would want to jump on board. I mean, it's a delusion, okay? Because that's not what drives them. And that's actually why, another reason why they got in trouble with not recognizing that Hamas was getting ready to attack, because they thought they kind of, they were projecting onto Hamas, kind of their economic desires. They thought, and so actually when Hamas would be like protesting at the border, they just thought that Hamas wanted more um, incentives, like, or humanitarian aid, or whatever you want to call it. That's what Israel was believing, you know. Um, and so that's why they just they kind of like forgot that they were evil people, that like because Hamas's charter is they want to get rid of Israel. Okay, they want to kill Jews, and take over the land. Okay, and so they just kind of forgot all that. So it's delusional to think that you could get peace with the Palestinian, peace with people that want to kill you. Okay. um and just a really quick thought about the innocent Palestinians. Like so we have to be really careful about thinking that the Palestinians are innocent, because like basically I don't know what percentage it would be, but a huge percentage maybe are not innocent. And so there was actually, besides Hamas coming over to kill Jews, there was some Palestinians that came over to loot and kidnap people. Okay. Um, um, oh, that one verse, did it talk about, and he deals with them violently or sells him? And so that could be a picture of um, the Palestinians that actually kidnap these people because they want to try to get some financial gain. Okay, so they might be willing to try to sell these hostages for financial gain. Okay, um, um, so I mean, there are some innocent Palestinians. Okay, and because there are stories when they're trying to get out of Gaza that Hamas is keeping them from leaving by either shooting them or blocking the way, or sending them back. But there's also a lot of guilty Palestinians. And this is what makes the war really complicated for Israel in trying to deal with Hamas. I mean, besides all the um, like Hamas, they'll hide. They have human shields. They use Palestinians as human shields. They hide under hospitals. They set up their rockets next to schools and kindergartens and hospitals. So they're very dangerous. I mean, they're very difficult to fight. To deal with. Um, And then, I mean, it almost seems impossible. It almost seems like you need the Messiah to come in to fix this situation, which you probably do, which they probably do. Um, and, and so with the Palestinians, so, I mean, actually, for years and years and years, like, let's not forget this, for years and years and years, Hamas has been indoctrinating a bunch of the Palestinians to hate the Jewish people, okay? The videos and the things that they taught them in the schools, um, you know, I mean, if you listen to some of those little kids, I mean, they just, like, hate Israel, the way they talk about Israel. So, um, but let's pray for the true innocent Palestinians, that would maybe belong to God. um but I don't believe we should get involved in telling Israel what to do in fighting this war, because um I- you know there's a lot of guilty people in Gaza that need to be dealt with. Anyways, I don't, it's just difficult. I don't, um, I mean, that's why just, I mean, first and foremost, we should be praying for the peace of Jerusalem. We should be praying for God's people in Israel, first and foremost. Okay. And then just trust that ultimately God is in charge of the innocent people around the world. Okay. Um, and so really we got to put them into God's hands and, you know, let Him deal with the situation. I mean, basically, if Palestinians are truly innocent and they're God followers, if they get killed in Gaza, they join the witnesses. What does God call them? The witnesses in heaven. Oh, cloud of witnesses is what God calls them. They'll join the cloud of witnesses in heaven that are, looking down. All these people up in heaven are looking down, watching what's happening on earth, until the Messiah comes and, takes them back to earth or whatever. However that all works, until they're called to join Messiah on earth. So we don't have to be, you know, um, as concerned about them. I mean, we definitely don't want to be fighting against God, you know, by worrying about the Palestinians. Um, and see, that's the thing too. I didn't put this in my video, but I didn't do a slide on this, but I talked about this once before. So, um, before the temple can be cleansed, they have to do a morning sacrifice and an evening sacrifice. And so what I talked about before was like the morning sacrifice was the Holocaust. And so now I believe this final war in Israel is the evening sacrifice. Okay. And this is all part of what God was doing to cleanse his temple and cleanse his people and get them ready for the coming of the Messiah. Um, so there's probably more I could say about that, but I can't think of anything right now. Okay. And the other thing that I have not heard anyone talking about too is calling this Jacob's trouble. Like everyone's still waiting for a 7-year tribulation period to come in the future. And it's like, hello, what's happening now? How come you don't consider this tribulation? Like how come you don't consider the war in Israel now Jacob's trouble? I do not get that. Um, uh and especially because I think we've been in tribulation for 10 years. Like, so I used to think maybe the tribulation period started 13 years ago. Because I mean, now I lost my ministry like 13 years ago, and so I was thinking that was when the tribulation started. But I also forgot that like 10 years ago I was also kind of kicked out of like teaching 10 years ago. So I'm like, well, maybe everyone else's tribulation happened 10 years ago. And so what, that was 2013, I guess. And so, um, so I, because basically I mean, I know, I got kicked out of the church, um, and wasn't allowed to teach. Um, I mean, literally, the second church I was at, the guy didn't want me to teach. Um, and, um, and it was interesting because I'd run into other people at the same time that had got kicked out of their churches and their ministries. And, so I think that like 10 years ago, maybe 10 to 13 years ago, you know, um, a bunch of God's people were getting kicked out of the churches and their ministries. Um, so that's why I don't have a lot of faith right now that people in the churches actually belong to God. Because I really think God's people are kind of more, they're the oppressed ones, they're kind of in hiding, they're in exile. Um, and also because I kind of see that in the scriptures, that, uh, a lot of God's um, people, before he called them into great ministries, they had some type of exile. I mean, Moses was in the wilderness for 40 years. I mean, Israel was in the wilderness for 40 years. Joseph was in prison, Anyways, so it just amazes me that people are still waiting for a tribulation to come, because I'm like, I don't know what you're looking at, but like, what do you think's been going on the last 10 years? Um, so anyways, and so especially with this war, it's like, okay, we've heard about Jacob's trouble for years and years and years, and then now you don't want to apply it to this war? I don't get that. Okay. And what's interesting about too, when God talks about Jacob's trouble, he compares it to labor pains. Okay. So another place where we're seeing the labor pains. Okay. So in Jeremiah, he says, "For I heard a cry as of a woman in labor, the anguish as of one giving birth to her first child, the cry of the daughter of Zion, gasping for breath, stretching out her hands, saying, Ah, woe is me, for I faint before murderers." Okay. Um, so, so with these labor pains, we see, um, um, oh, so I thought this was going to be the verse. Oh, I think it's on the next slide that actually mentioned Jacob's late trouble. That's on the next slide. But we see the daughter of Zion crying because she's fainting before murderers. Okay. So that would be the war in Israel. Okay. And then in Jeremiah 5. So I started looking at Jeremiah 5 and just found a ton of verses that, like, I think talk about this war. Okay. So in Jeremiah 5, it says, "Go up through her vine rows and destroy, but do not execute a complete destruction. Strip away her branches, for they are not the Lord's. For the house of Israel and the house of Judah have dealt very treacherously with me, declares the Lord. They have lied about the Lord and said, Not he, misfortune will not come on us, and we will not see sword or famine. Therefore, thus says the Lord, the God of hosts, because you have spoken this word, behold, I am making my words in your mouth fire, and this people wood, and it will consume them." So, so these people that have lied, okay, so I like these verses because God says he's not going to execute a complete destruction, that there's going to be a remnant that survives the destruction in Israel and the destruction in America. And he's going to leave his people behind. So this verse too, they have lied about the Lord and said, Not he, misfortune will not come on us. That's another peace or safety thing, and we will not see sword or famine. Um, and so God took these words of Netanyahu and made him fire in his mouth. Okay. And, because actually some people believe that the reason why, that these normalization deals were motivating Israel's enemies to attack them. Okay. Um, so that's kind of interesting. Okay. So here's the verses that talk about labor pains. Okay. Jacob's trouble. "For thus says the Lord, I've heard a sound of terror, of dread, and there is no peace. Ask now and see if a male can give birth. Why do I see every male with his hands on his loins as a woman in childbirth?" Okay, so we're still seeing talking about labor pains. Okay, and why have all faces turned pale? Alas, for that day is great. There is none like it, and it is the time of Jacob's distress, but he will be saved from it. Okay, notice that that's verse 7. Okay, remember this happened on October 7th. Okay, for it shall come about on that day, declares the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off their neck and will tear off their bonds, and strangers will no longer make them their slaves. But they will serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will raise up for him. So, what's cool about these verses is that we see God's promises that, God's going to save us from this distress, and then they're going to, okay, when it says they'll serve God and David their king, whom I will raise up for you. Well, the Messiah comes from the line of David. Okay, Jesus comes from the line of David. Okay, fear not, O Jacob, my servant, declares the Lord, and do not be dismayed, O Israel, for behold, I will save you from afar, and your offspring from the land of their captivity. And Jacob will return and be quiet and at ease, and no one will make him afraid. For I am with you, declares the Lord, to save you. For I will destroy completely all the nations where I've scattered you. Only I will not destroy you completely, but I will chasten you justly, and will by no means leave you unpunished. Um, so I don't like those verses where God talks about chastening us. For thus says the Lord, your wound is incurable, your injury is serious. There is no one to plead your cause, no healing for your sore, no recovery for you. All your lovers have forgotten you. They do not seek you. So, so don't you see that? Like right now, it's like all these people now are turning against Israel. Okay, Saudis, where are the Saudis now? That were so willing to make a deal. Now that this war started, they kind of have not said a word. Okay. For I have wounded you with the wound of an enemy, with the punishment of a cruel one, because your iniquity is great and your sins are numerous. If you're wondering why God's allowing this to happen, and then so God kind of repeats himself. Therefore, all who devour you will be devoured, and all your adversaries, every one of them, will go into captivity, and those who plunder you will be for plunder. Good promises, okay? God's, gonna go after Israel's enemies. And all who prey upon you, I will give for prey. For I will restore you to health, and I will heal you of your wounds, declares the Lord, because they have called you an outcast, saying, it is Zion. No one cares for her. Okay. Um, so, um, so very powerful verses. Okay. Um, so I kind of made a list of some of the sins of Israel. So why did I say Haggai 2, 1-3? So, those were the verses that I just read to you, I think. So, I'm not sure why I put that in there. Oh, I know why. Because remember in those verses it said, who, has seen this temple, like who saw the temple before and how do you see it now? Okay. So I want you to remember what was going on in Israel before they got attacked by Hamas. Okay. Was it in that greatest shape? Were they being glorifying to God? Okay. So what we saw was on the right, we saw Netanyahu pushing through his judicial reforms. We saw them relying on their military might and prowess to win wars rather than on God. Sometimes they would talk about God, but sometimes they would talk about power. I think I heard Netanyahu, like, he said power like 3 times, and I don't remember God in that speech. They were looking to man-made peace. And then the security cabinet was voting that they were going to help prevent the collapse of the PA, the Palestinian Authority. So just kind of bizarre stuff going on. And then on the left, They were protesting weekly against the government in Israel for over 9 months, because they hated it when Netanyahu came to power. Okay, and they hated the judicial reforms that he was doing. So every Saturday night they were protesting. Okay, for over 9 months. Okay, and then they would even have some protests during the week where they would, like block the road to the airport and stuff like that. Okay, um, so they weren't trusting, God. Um, they were like the 10 spies in the wilderness that didn't have faith. Okay. Um, and then we saw reservists were refusing to report in protest. Okay, and so that was all starting to make Israel look weak and disorganized. And so I think that emboldened Israel's enemies. Okay. And then at the same time, too, we had the craziness going on in America where I mean we couldn't even vote in a speaker of the house, okay? So uh so I think Israel looked weak, to God's enemies, and America looked weak. And so I think that's why they were emboldened to attack it this time, okay? Um and then I mean Biden does some stuff too to make, the fact that he gave like $6 billion to Iran. Um, I mean, he does some stuff too to make us look weak to our enemies. And then also when Israel was like gay pride parades were going on. I mean, there's probably a lot more. So I wanted to mention this on Yom Kippur. Okay, so Yom Kippur, holiest day on the Jewish calendar. Okay, that is when the Jewish people are supposed to, humble themselves. They're supposed to wear clothes that are like your death shroud, because you're supposed to be so humble, that, I mean, really you're supposed to like, um, um, act like you're dead on Yom Kippur, or it's your day of death, okay? Because it's supposed to be a very solemn occasion where you're humbling yourselves and looking up to God for um, forgiveness, um, and um, and atonement. Okay, and so on Yom Kippur there was, but in Israel this year, okay, it was just sickening. On Yom Kippur there was protests over the curtains put up to. Okay, so they would have Yom Kippur services. Um, so they were Kol Nidre services. So they like to do them in the park, so that people could join them or whatever. And so there was actually protests. So and the government actually like outlawed the curtains, which one was kind of a dumb thing to begin with. Okay, um, but then instead of just like accepting the fact that the government made this decision and then maybe just returning to the synagogue and doing your Yom Kippur services in the synagogue, they put up their curtains unlawfully in the park. Okay, and so then the other side were protesting the curtains, and so they were fighting over the curtains. So the curtains are to separate the men and the women because the Orthodox believe in separating the men and women for when they're praying and stuff. Um, so just a lot of fight and protest about that, And so there were people that, okay, then after that they went back to the synagogue to pray. Okay. And so, but just not just ugly. Okay. So, so in Isaiah we read, okay, so in Isaiah, it's like Israel is saying, why have we fasted and you do not see? Why have we humbled ourselves and you do not notice? And then God says, behold, on the day of your fast you find your desire and drive hard all your workers. Behold, you fast for contention and strife and to strike with a wicked fist. You do not fast like today to make your voice heard on high. Is it a fast like this which I choose a day for? Okay, this is the type of fast that God likes. A day for a man to humble himself, for bowing one's head like a reed and for spreading out sackcloth and ashes as a bed. Will you call this a fast, even an acceptable day to the Lord? Okay. So if we wonder why God's not hearing us, are we, humbling ourselves, when we pray to God? Okay. Or are we fighting with our brothers? Okay. So the thing I really believe about this war is that that God's using this war as a test. Okay. In Jeremiah 6:22, God says, "Thus says the Lord." Okay, so a lot of people are looking at Ezekiel 37 and 38, but we also read about a war in Jeremiah 6. So God says, which like it's a little clearer in these verses. Thus says the Lord, behold, a people is coming from the northland, and a great nation will be aroused from the remote parts of the earth. They seize bow and spear. They are cruel and have no mercy. Their voice roars like the sea, and they ride on horses, arrayed as a man for the battle against you, O daughter of Zion. We have heard the report of it. Our hands are limp. Anguish has seized us. Pain as of a woman in childbirth. There we go again, labor pains. Okay. Do not go out into the field, and do not walk on the road, for the enemy has a sword. Terror is on every side. That is so true, because they're getting terrorist attacks on every side in Israel. Okay. So the people from the Northland, I mean, that's definitely talking about Iran, but it says, and they ride on horses. Well, the horses could actually be a picture of their proxies, okay? Because Iran doesn't fight their wars directly, they use their proxies, okay? They use Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis to fight their wars, okay? O daughter of my people, put on sackcloth and roll in ashes, mourn as for an only son, a lamentation most bitter, for suddenly the destroyer will come upon us. I have made you an assayer and a tester among my people, that you may know and assay their way. All of them are stubbornly rebellious, going about as a talebearer. They are bronze and iron. They, all of them, are corrupt. The bellows blow fiercely. The lead is consumed by the fire. In vain the refining goes on, but the wicked are not separated. They call them rejected silver, because the Lord has rejected them. So really powerful verses. So let me point out a few things. So mourn as for an only son. That is what God's calling us to do during this war. Is we need to mourn for Israel, like Israel is our only son. Okay, and pray for Israel. And then, because we read about Rachel weeping for her children, okay? We need to be like Rachel, weeping for her children, okay? Okay, so then when God says, I've made you an assayer and a tester among my people, he's talking about the destroyer, okay? And so God is using this war to test his people, okay? An assayer would be someone who, like, can like see the value of it. Has to do with looking at metals and whether they're pure or not, okay? And so that's what God is doing, is using this war to assay us, to test us, to see what kind of metal we are, okay? And so God says, like, they're bronze and iron. So bronze is like the belly of the beast. I think those are the people on the left, the Obama followers. Iron connects to Netanyahu and Trump. And so God says, in vain the refining goes on, okay? But the wicked are not separated. So powerful verses. Okay, so that's what's going on. We're being tested, okay? Because remember that Abraham was tested at the binding of Isaac, okay? Which, basically this is in, so this is interesting, because this is Genesis 22, was when God called Abraham to offer up Isaac as a sacrifice, okay? And the Jewish people call it the binding of Isaac, okay? So what's interesting is that's Genesis 22. So this attack of Hamas was on Chesvan 22. Oh, no, not Chesvan. Sorry, wrong month. Um, was on, let me get the right month, Tishri 22. Okay, October 7th was Tishri 2022. So we see that 22 number. Okay, um, so 7 and 22. So it's kind of interesting because it's like a 7th day that was also an 8th day. Okay, so um, and because what's interesting about the 8th day is that's the day of circumcision. Okay, um, and okay, so God tested Abraham, and when he saw that Abraham was willing to let Isaac be a burnt offering, he knew that Abraham was righteous. Okay, like Abraham passed the test basically. And so what I believe is that if people are willing to, support Israel and let them fight this war, if they support the right of Israel to, um, you know, uh, avenge the death of their people, then, um, then then God's gonna see that they're righteous. Okay. Um, um, because basically the Jewish people now is, that are fighting this war, they're a burnt offering, they're a sacrifice. Okay. They're sacrificing their lives for the sake of Israel. Okay. Um, so we see that in the story of Genesis 22. Um, and then, but we also see a similar thing happening with Joseph, and his brothers, at the end of Genesis. So they made 2 trips to Egypt, to get food while Joseph was second in command to Pharaoh. Um, and so the second time they came, Joseph tested his brothers to see if they would stand up for Benjamin. So remember that Joseph put his cup in Benjamin's sack, okay? Because he was testing to see what his brothers would do, okay? Because he wasn't too sure about them because they sold him into slavery, okay? Um, so, but then what happened? They stood up for Benjamin, and so then Joseph knew that they were righteous, okay? Or that they were now honest men or whatever. Um, so, and what I think is interesting is, so we have the 2 visits to Joseph, and I think that connects to the 2 feasts of um, Esther. There's 2 feasts in the book of Esther. There's actually 2 feasts in Esther 1. One's 7 days and one's 180 days feast. And so what I think is these, and then we see the rooster crows twice. And so I think with the number 2, like the 2 feasts, one of them connects to Trump doing these normalization deals, and then the second feast would be Biden doing, his Saudi deal. Okay. That's what I think, is happening in scripture. Okay. Another thing we see with testing is we see that Jesus, when he comes, he separates the sheep and the goats, and so the sheep are the ones that cared for his people. Okay. So they would be the ones that were praying for Israel during this war. They would be the ones that would be standing up, saying, I believe in Israel's right to protect itself. Um, you know, and so it's interesting to see the different world leaders and what they will say about Israel, So, um, anyways, so, oh, another story too that we see in scripture on the 7th day. So remember, Hamas attacked on October 7th. Vashti would not come with royal crown. So remember in Revelation, we read about a woman with a crown of 12 stars. So the 12 stars would connect to the 12 tribes of Israel, okay? And so there's this woman that loves Israel, okay, who has a crown of 12 stars, and so, um, so I think God says something like, let's see if I can find that one more page. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Okay, what's interesting about this woman is she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. Okay, um, I mean, so I kind of think the woman connects to like the church, and so like the Jewish people would be the man and the woman would be the church, the Christians, the Jesus followers. Um, and so she's clothed with the sun. So I think sometimes sun connects to Israel. Um, okay, so when it says the moon under her feet, um, I mean the moon could connect to Trump, or it could connect to um the the Muslim religion. Okay, because remember they use the crescent on their flags and stuff. Um, so yeah, she had a crown of 12 stars. Okay, so remember Vashti would not come. Okay, so this is in the first chapter of Esther. Vashti would not come with the royal crown on the seventh day. Okay, and so so the seventh day connects to the Hamas attack. Basically this war in Israel. So Vashti would be all those people that aren't willing to support Israel's right to defend itself. Okay. The pro-Palestinian protesters and all that stuff. Okay. So during this time, God's looking to see if are we going to be like Ruth was with Naomi, where she says, my God will be your God and my people will be your people, or are we going to be like Jonathan was with David? And I don't remember what he said, but something similar. So, okay. So 1290 days, we read about that in Daniel. I talked about this in my last video, or one of the earlier videos. Was August 9th was when we read that in the Wall Street Journal about the Saudi deal. And that happened on 1290 days after the deal of the century. Okay. So Daniel says, okay, so in Daniel 12, he says, but as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. So what was interesting about when Israel got attacked, so the Jewish people were celebrating the Feast of Sukkot, and that's the one where they build booths, okay? And then, so they had their 7 days of Sukkot, and then this would have been the 8th day of Sukkot. And God actually doesn't say a whole lot about the 8th day. He actually says, he calls it a solemn day. And so I think there's a prophetical shadow about this 8th day. And then we also know the 8th day is the day of circumcision, where flesh is cut off. Okay. So it was a solemn day. And so in Israel, the Jewish people, actually what they do in Israel is, so during the Feast of Sukkot, they make it an 8-day festival. And on the 8th day is when they celebrate 2 holidays on the 8th day. The 8-day gathering, and then what they call Simchat Torah, which is where the joy of the Torah, where they celebrate the joy of the Torah, their love for the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. Okay, well, so because of this attack in Israel, they ended up not celebrating Simchat Torah. So what's really interesting is that outside of Israel, it's Sukkot is actually a 9-day holiday. And so they have the 7 days of Sukkot, and then they have the 8th day, which, outside of Israel, it's a day where they do Yizkor, which is their prayer for departed parents, so they remember the dead. So I think it's kind of a more solemn day, outside of Israel. And then the 9th day is Simchat Torah, and that's where they actually pull the Torah out of, they have it in the front. I forget what they call that thing, the ark in the front, and they pull out all their Torahs actually on that day, and they dance with them. Okay, so it's supposed to be a very joyous holiday. And I really think Simchat Torah is a picture of the return of the Messiah. Okay. So it's very fascinating to me that it's like this attack on Israel postpones Simchat Torah. Okay. Um, and um, and so it's interesting that we read in Daniel that it says, "Conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time." Um, and so it's like the scrolls are still tightly closed. Okay, they weren't open like they are in Simchat Torah. Um, or they're still in the ark, or they're sealed up. Okay, and so basically it's a postponement on, like maybe you would have expected the Messiah to come on that day, like I probably was, and he didn't, and so there's a postponement until the Messiah comes. Okay, um, so then Daniel goes on to say, many will go back and forth. Okay, well, so we read in Exodus 32 that they will go back and forth with the sword. Okay, so many will go back and forth. So that's what we're seeing happening in Israel. And then it says knowledge will increase. Well, we're increasing the knowledge of who is standing behind Israel and who isn't. Okay. And so then Daniel says, I looked and behold, two others were standing, one on this bank of the river and the other on that bank of the river. So that could be Biden and Netanyahu. We got Biden on the left and Netanyahu on the right, sorry. And one said to the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, could be a messianic figure, how long will it be until the end of these wonders? I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river as he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. As for me, I heard but could not understand. So I said, my Lord, what will be the outcome of these events? So, also this man dressed in linen could be a picture of the witnesses, the cloud of witnesses in heaven, because God gave them. So in Revelation 5, we read about the saints under the altar, and God gives them a linen robe, and says, just wait until the rest of the people that, are going to be sacrificed, join you, because they're like, how long is this going to take? So actually, this could be a connection to the, so I don't know if that's the fifth seal, or the fifth trumpet. So that's in Revelation. So that's what I really think is those people under the altar. I think a lot of those people are from the Holocaust, but then we also have the Christian witnesses would be there too. So more martyrs are going to join them until the Messiah finally comes, when they put a stop, to, people dying for God's sake. Okay. And so this time, times, and half a time, I've been looking at that, wondering if that connects to like 33 days of war. So anyways, and so I'm wondering if time, times, and half time, and then 1335, and then 33 days, and 1335. I wonder if they're all connected. Okay, because I'm seeing this time frame of like 33. Wondering if that's connected. What's interesting, it says as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people. So right now, like today, they're meeting. Okay, so the G7 is meeting to discuss the war in Israel, because the world all has to get involved in this war and tell Israel what to do. Okay, so G7. So I'm wondering if they're going to come back. So they have a 2-day meeting. I'm wondering if they're going to come back tomorrow and try to put a stop to Israel fighting against their enemies. See, I don't really know if Biden is done with the fullness of his sins, or there's a little bit more. All during this war, Um, well, I have another slide where I talk about that, but he's kind of taking both sides. He's not fully on either side. He's sitting on the fence. Um, and so I don't really know because, like, the Saudi deal, in scripture we read about the setup of the abomination of desolation. So the Saudi deal could be, could have just been set up. And so I don't know if something's going to happen where we're going to see more, like, I don't know if more is going to come from the Saudi deal, that they're going to force it to happen after this war. Because, I mean, basically with the Saudi deal, it's about dividing the land of Israel. Or if, I mean, that seems a little hard for me to believe right now. But we could be seeing something like that. Or we could just be seeing G7 come and just say, you guys just have to stop. You need to have a ceasefire now, you know. So we'll see what happens. I mean, so it might connect to as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people. So it could connect to that. So we'll see what happens. And then, so it goes on to say, okay, Daniel 12:9. I don't know why I highlighted 12:9. Oh, because that connects to the 1290 days, the Saudi deal. Okay. And then so he said, go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end time. So, like I said, Israel could not celebrate Simchat Torah because of the war. Many will be purged, purified, and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly. So the terrorists and the protesters are showing their wickedness during this time. And none of the wicked will understand, but those who have insight will understand. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished, so I have that being the deal of the century, and the abomination of desolation is set up, will be 1290 days. So that is 1290 days from the deal of the century to Biden's peace deal with Saudi Arabia. And then it says, how blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1335 days. But as for you, go to the end, you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age. Definitely a lot of prophecy in these verses. So we saw the fulfillment of the 1290 days. That actually happened. But then the 1335, I thought that was going to be September 23rd, I think, is like 1335 days after the deal of the century. But nothing. Oh, yeah, because I wrote right here. Was 9/23/23, which was the day before Yom Kippur Eve. But nothing really significant happened. So, unless it was that, God wanted his people to wait until Yom Kippur and then he was going to decide on Yom Kippur the fate of their next year. That's a possibility. But I also think we might be looking for another 1335. What's interesting is November 12th is 1335 after March 18th. Which, okay, March 18th was the shutdown from COVID. Okay. So that's a possible date to be looking at as being a day of, like, being blessed. Okay. And there's this whole thing with, okay, if there was a second Sukkot on the calendar, it would start on it would start on October 30th. Okay, because October 30th is Chesvan 15. Okay, so remember with Passover that God said, okay, you're going to do Passover. If you didn't get a chance to celebrate it in the first month, then you do it in the second month on the same day. So what if Chesvan 15, which is 1 month after Sukkot, is like a second type of Sukkot? Okay, but then same thing where we have like 2 weeks. Okay, because we read in, I know this is complicated, but we read in, like, the day of Solomon, they celebrated the holiday for like 2 weeks. They were trying to dedicate, like, 1 week was dedicating the temple, and the second week was celebrating the feast, or however that works out. And so, The second week, okay, so Sukkot would be like, the second Sukkot would be October 30th through November 5th, and then the second week would be November 6th to November 12th. Okay, so that's why that would be kind of interesting about November 12th. Okay, it would be like the seventh day of the second week. Okay, so that's a possibility. Then, I was like, I charted a bunch of ideas that I had about the 1335 days. Okay, one of them was like, okay, like connecting to Trump. What if one was moving the embassy? Then he had 6 peace deals would connect to the 33. The 5 would be the day that, like Biden being hung on the gallows, which is 50 cubits high. Okay, the gallows for Mordecai was 50 cubits high. But 5 could also be a picture of the dividing of time, or, so like a picture of the Civil War in America, or the dividing of the people. So that was an idea. Another one was, okay, Trump, the 1 could be the deal of the century. Then we had 1-3 would be like the 3 years with COVID. The second 3 would be the 3 things of Biden. And then the 5, once again, would be like the Civil War. Israel, 1 could be the embassy move that happened on their 70th anniversary. The 3 could connect to Obama, Trump, and Biden. Another 3 could connect to the reasonableness bill, because they do 3 readings of the bill. And then 5 could connect to the 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, because that was what was interesting about the attack of Hamas, is that it happened 50 years, on the anniversary of 50 years after the Yom Kippur War. Anyways, so that's why that's like a fulfillment of the gallows for Mordecai was 50 cubits high. We're seeing the attack on Israel happen 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, so a fulfillment of that scripture. So another thought I had was, okay, so we had 1 week of Sukkot, then we had 30 days of war, and then 3 days of war. Then what if the 5 is half of the week of the second week of the second Sukkot? So hopefully you followed that. So, which, because I'm looking at the middle of this week that we're in right now, because in the middle is November 9th, okay? The 4th day would be November 9th, okay, which is a very interesting day, because it is okay, so November 9th, which is Thursday, would be a middle of a week. It'd be the middle of the second week, which is the fulfillment of the prophecy, and so God in the middle of the week puts a stop to sacrificing grain offering. He could be putting a stop to his people getting killed, because Jesus comes and gathers his people. It was 7 years after Trump was announced as the winner, so it could be considered like Trump's birthday. Kristallnacht happened on 11/9/1938, which was 85 years ago. The fall, okay, this is interesting. The fall of the Berlin Wall happened on 11/9 in 1989, which was 34 years ago. It's Chesvan 25, so 25, that number kind of connects to Christmas. So I was gonna say something. Let's see. So it's actually the 34th day of the war. Okay. So November 8th is actually oh, I know what I was gonna say. So November 8th is actually the 33rd day of the war, and so we read in Leviticus 12 about how the woman is separated for 33 days. Okay. Being purified for 33 days. Okay. A woman who's given birth is being purified for 33 days. Because the birth could have been the twins on Okay, so that's coming up too in a slide. Jacob and Esau being born on October 7th. So we're seeing um, Esau would be Hamas, and then Jacob would be the Jewish people who are holding on to the heel of Esau. They're trying to not get their head stepped on by Esau. Okay. Um, um, and then what's interesting about 11:9 is it's like the reverse of 9/11. Okay. So what's interesting is the Jewish people are calling October 7th like um their 9/11. Okay. Um, but then it'd be interesting if, kind of the end of Israel, I mean, America, we kind of had 9/11, and then what if everything kind of gets wrapped up on 11/9? I'm not really sure. So we'll see what happens. So, and they also read Psalm 119 on that day. So that's what's going on that day. So, um, I'm going to check this off so I don't repeat it to you. Okay, so I told you about this. Um, um, and then I have a tag from a sweater that my friend gave me that was 119 um, dollars, which I really hope she didn't spend that much money on that sweater. I really don't think she did. She probably got it on clearance. But what an expensive sweater, goodness gracious. And so I didn't know if that was, for some reason I pulled that aside and saved it because I didn't know if God was showing me that. But I got all mad when something didn't happen on 9/11, and I was like, this tag doesn't mean anything. And then I looked at it the other day and I'm like, oh no, but it actually says 11/9. It's $119. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a sign from God. We'll just have to wait and see. So we'll see what happens. So another thought I had about 1, 3 through 5. Okay, so I said 1 could connect to the deals of the century, but I'm like, what if 1 connects to Obama? Okay, that's a possibility. And see, so this actually comes out of the story Genesis 40, where you have the baker and the cupbearer thrown in jail. Okay, and so one could connect to Obama, and then we have through the first 3 would connect to Trump's 3 sins against Israel. Okay, that's where if you take all his peace deals and kind of make them one of the sins, like lump them together. And so like you have the moving the embassy is 1, recognizing the Golan Heights is 2, the deal of the century plus 5 others, which by the way is 6, right? 6 peace deals would be like the 3rd of his sins against Israel. Because we see in Genesis 40 that the cupbearer has a dream about the 3 branches of the vine. Okay. And so Joseph interprets the dream and says the 3 branches are 3 days. Okay, and what we're seeing with the vine is that each of these branches are causing the grapes to grow. Okay, so what we're seeing with Trump with his sins, it's like his people are growing because of the 3, signs that he did against Israel. You know, they they thought he was some great, like he brought peace to the Middle East or whatever. They talk about him like that. So they're growing into grapes of wrath because they saw these things that Trump did, and are turning him into a messianic figure. Okay, and so that actually connects to Peter betraying Jesus 3 times. Okay, so I think what we're seeing is a kind of a similar repeat with Biden. So Biden had 3 sins against Israel. One is on 7/14, he signed this paper with Lapid, and it actually talks about like the 2-state solution. And then on October 27th in 2022, his administration brokered the maritime agreement where they actually gave away some of Israel's sea land. Okay, which there's gas there. Okay, so that was a bad deal for Israel. And then his third one would be this Saudi quote unquote peace deal, which we know if they were to carry it out, it would divide the land of Israel. If they would do it the way the Saudis wanted, it would be dividing the land. Okay. And so that would connect to the baker's 3 baskets of bread on the head. Okay. So what if the wine connects to the Christians in America? So that connects to Trump. That's why Trump would be the cupbearer. So the bread would connect to the Jewish people in Israel. Okay, so then Biden had these 3 baskets of bread on his head. And what we saw is that in the 3rd basket, the birds are eating the bread. Okay, so because of Biden's Saudi deal, the Israelis get attacked. Okay, there's also kind of could be a fulfillment with Netanyahu and the baker. I mean, sometimes I don't know if Biden's the baker or Netanyahu's the baker. Because there's not the other way you could look at it with Netanyahu is that the 3 baskets could connect to Obama, Trump, and Biden. Okay, and so then the same thing with the 3rd president, is when Israel gets attacked. Okay. So that's been going on because there's been a little bit to that Netanyahu's been kind of baking up some stuff that make it hard on Israel too, like from the very beginning of his power in Israel, because especially if you see kind of like what he was involved in around the Oslo Accords and things like that. Like, I mean, he does things that aren't all that great for Israel either. Okay. And he's been doing it for quite some time. Um, and I don't really know. I mean, I'm not sure how much of this is true, but I actually read somewhere. See, and I take everything with a grain of salt because I'm not really sure what's true, but they had said that Netanyahu was actually supporting Hamas. I don't know. That sounds like a conspiracy theory. I'm not sure of that. But we do know that his administration was going to start helping the Palestinian Authority, which is kind of weird and bizarre. Um, so, so then 5 would be the dividing of time, okay, which would be civil war in America. It could be the middle of a week, like I was talking about the week. So that's a possibility for 1335. Then I did it with Esther too. Like, okay, because, like first we see Mordecai with sackcloth. So that would have been Israel getting attacked on October 7th. Esther talks about 30 days not being summoned, so that could connect to the first 3. But they also say like assemble the Jews in Susa and fast for 3 days, night or day. So the first 3 connect to Esther not being summoned for 30 days and the Jews fasting for 3 days. Which would be another way of saying 30 days. We read in Daniel that if you pray to another god for 30 days, you're cast into the lion's den. Okay. So that could connect to the testing of if there's 30 days of war in Israel. Well, there's been 30 days. I shouldn't say if. There has been 30 days of war in Israel. So all these other people that are praying to another god during these 30 days instead of worshiping the God of Israel and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so they're going to be cast into the lion's den at some point. So then another 3 would connect to the Esther and her maidens fasting in the same way. So that could connect to Rachel weeping for her children. But also I'm wondering if that connects to Trump's peeps weeping for 3 days. And so I had the 3 days being November 6th, 7th, and 8th. I don't really know for sure. We just know that we saw Trump in court yesterday. And, so his people could be weeping now. Because of the things that Trump said yesterday in court. Because, now what we have is people on the left are just having a great time making fun of Trump, so that his followers could be leaving now. Okay. So then the dividing of time would be 5, civil war in America. So what we see in Esther is on the third day, Esther risked her life to go into the king, which is not according to the law. And so she'd be like the lawless one. Okay. So the third day would be like November 8th. Um, um, so but that could also connect to the gallows for Mordecai that's 50 cubits high, where we see Haman gets killed on the gallows that was built for Mordecai. That could connect to, okay, there's another verse later that I mentioned that talks about this. So I don't think there's any new information here, but it's all listed here. So Biden's peace deal actually is like the 7th peace deal, okay? If you added to the 6 of Trump, okay? So really don't see any new information on here. Huh. Okay. Then, okay, so like I said, I think this attack of Hamas, okay, is a fulfillment of scripture, okay, of Esther, okay. So Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches and the number of his sons, and every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he had promoted him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet which she has prepared, and tomorrow also I am invited by her with the king. So 2 banquets, okay? Yet all of this does not satisfy me. Every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, then Jerez, I don't know how you say that, his wife and all his friends said to him, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet. And the advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. So Haman, scripture, trying to figure out the prophecies is a little difficult because we don't know exactly who's fulfilling, which aspect. But it, like Haman recounting the glory of his riches and the number of his sons in every instant where the king had magnified him, that could be the Saudis. But actually, while I was reading it, I said it kind of reminded me of Netanyahu. Okay. So Netanyahu would be saying, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet. That could be Netanyahu saying, so Biden invited me, to meet with them. Okay. But then it wouldn't be Netanyahu saying, yet all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the gates. I guess that's probably why I had the Saudis being Haman at first, because, the Saudis weren't happy to do this peace deal, with the Jews sitting at the king's gate. Okay. They wanted a Palestinian state. Okay. The Saudis didn't like Netanyahu like building settlements, in other parts of the land. Okay. Everyone wanted that land for the Palestinians. Okay. So, his wife and all his friends said to Haman, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. So that could be Iran, could be the friends of, so this is kind of switching to, where Haman would be like Hamas. Okay. And they're telling Hamas to build a gallows 50 cubits high. Okay. And the advice pleased Haman, so we had the gallows made. So kind of interesting that Hamas kind of connects to Haman. And so it was interesting that the 50 cubits high connects to Israel being attacked 50 years after the Yom Kippur War. And Israel was attacked in the morning too. Okay, so could be a fulfillment of this verse. In Esther 7, so we don't have time to go through this whole book, but there's a lot of prophecies being fulfilled in that book. Okay. Then Harbonah, one of the eunuchs who were before the king, said, Behold, okay, so this is after the second banquet. Um, so during the second banquet is when Haman gets revealed. Okay, and we also see during the second visit to Egypt and Joseph is when Joseph gets revealed. Okay. So Joseph is a messianic figure, so that could be a picture of the Messiah being revealed after the second visit, okay, or during the second visit, however you want to say that. Um, and then, this during the second banquet, that's when Haman is revealed. Okay, so after, so Haman's the enemy of the Jews, okay? So we'll have the Messiah be revealed and we'll have the enemy of the Jews be revealed, okay? So Harbonah like brings up these gallows that were built, and the king says, hang Haman on it. So they hung Haman on the gallows, which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. So one potential fulfillment of this verse, hanging Haman on the gallows, could be that, okay, so Hamas attacked Israel, and so then they turn around and attack them. Israel, has their ground invasion in Gaza. Okay. Um, what is that? An eye for an eye kind of thing. And then, um, but then we read in Esther 2 where two of the king's officials who guarded the door were hung on a gallows. Okay. And so Netanyahu and Biden were supposed to be guarding the door, and so they at some point could be hung on gallows, okay? Like killed basically. So that's that. Okay, so Daniel's statue, so Netanyahu's been around for a while. In and out for a while, you know. So he's the head of gold. Gold connects to the Jewish people, silver connects to the Christians. But we read about the eighth king. He's of the seven, and then he goes to destruction. Okay, so I think that could be Obama. I mean, not Obama. Like I said, I think Trump is the eighth. He's one. He used to be the sixth king, and then he's gonna end up being the eighth king, and he comes to destruction. Because, like I said, I think God's gonna let him come back to bring in judgment on Biden. And then we saw with the deal of the century. So after Trump's deal of the century, it was 7 weeks until the shutdown started. It was actually 7 weeks and 2 days was when the started the coronavirus shutdown is. So kind of see a pattern of God where he brings judgment after 7 days. But then what we saw with 7 weeks after August 9th was September 27th. And so the judgment, well, I mean, so this is kind of interesting because then we didn't see Israel being attacked until October 4th, which was the middle of the eighth week. Okay. And so what we read in Daniel 9:27, which, okay, 9:27 is interesting because that connects to September 27th, which was the seventh week. And so it says, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. So so yeah, so that was 7 weeks after trying to divide the land of Israel, a plague comes. Because we read about like 7 days with the story of Miriam. But this could also 7 days, the 1 week could also connect to Sukkot. But then it says in the middle of the week of the second week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. So that would be the middle of the eighth week. So like putting a stop to sacrifice and grain offering would connect to, killing Jews. And then on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So I don't know why. Okay, so October 10th, I mean, so I put that in there too because that could connect to, I mean, that wouldn't explain my eighth week, the middle of the eighth week thing. That would be a different thing. But on October 10th was when, so like 3 days, it took Israel kind of like 3 days to kind of get back on their feet to, to, they switched from defensive mode to offensive mode, like on October 10th. Is that right? 3 days or like October 9th? Um, so, anyways, but that doesn't help my middle of the second week, the eighth week. So ignore that October 10th, actually. So on the wing of abominations, so what that means is like if you see, if we could call Biden's Saudi deal an abomination that causes desolation, then on the wing of that will come one who makes desolate. That would be Hamas coming to, attack Israel. Okay. But then that's going to happen until a complete destruction is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So then we're going to see a complete destruction poured out on Hamas, I guess, hopefully. Um, huh. I don't think I knew I had this verse on this slide twice. Okay, the middle of eighth week was October 7th when Hamas attacked the Jewish people. So that's actually 8 week and 4 days after the 1290 days where the Saudi deal was announced in Wall Street Journal. Okay. So is God going to shorten the days? So is God going to shorten? So everyone's talking about this war in Israel is going to be really long. And really, when you think about what they have to try to accomplish in Gaza, it could be a long war, But is God going to shorten the days? Because if his people, the Jewish people who he loves, are the ones fighting this war, they're going to end up getting killed in this war, so it could be that he'd want to shorten these days. Okay, so in Matthew 24, it says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever's in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. So the abomination of desolation could be Biden's Saudi deal on day 1290, or the Hamas attack. Obviously, is abomination that causes desolation. Okay, so God says when you see that happening, standing in the holy place. What is the holy place? Israel. Okay, and so the reader would only understand that, like God's enemies would not understand that because they do not read God's scriptures and do not believe that Israel is a holy place. Okay. So then it says those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. So that would be Judea would connect to Jesus. Okay, so Jesus's peeps. So during this time after after we saw Hamas attacking Israel, we should flee to the mountains. We should support Israel. Okay. There's probably multiple fulfillment of these verses. Okay. Because it could actually connect to the Jewish people in Israel should, go to the mountains instead of hanging around Gaza or the northern part of the country. There's probably a fulfillment that way too. And then it says, whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Okay, so that could connect to Hamas, could be on the housetop. Okay, like they should probably flee out of, like, don't waste your time to go in the house. Like, actually, that could be a picture of, if you're Hamas, don't try to get stuff out of people's houses in Israel. Um, or what if Biden's on the housetop? Um, um, oh, I can't click to what I thought how that would connect to Biden. Like, don't go down to get the things out that are in the house. Like, maybe that would be him trying to get things out of Gaza, maybe. Huh. I don't remember what I was thinking with that one. And then whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. So those in Gaza in the field shouldn't turn back. They should leave Gaza. But it also connected Trump's people wanting to turn back to make him president because now they're all upset, because Trump's, if you listen to Trump, he talks about how Biden's made the world a mess because now there's this war in Israel. So then it says, woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. So that connects to birth pangs. But we also saw that, like, those who are pregnant in Gaza, like, they had to give them birthing packages because their hospitals are in bad shape there. And then it says, pray that your flight will not be in the winter on a Sabbath. So October 7th was a Sabbath. And it was a day when the Jewish people start praying for rain, so kind of like the start of winter in Israel. Because then it says, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. So, so we, have moved into the great tribulation with this war in Israel. Okay. And then it says, unless those days have been cut short, no life would have been saved. So like I said, for the sake of the elect, the Jewish people, hopefully those days will be cut short. And then later on, I think the next verse, it says, then if anyone says to you, like, hopefully after the days were cut short, behold, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe him. So that could be people talking about Trump, because they kind of make him out to be like a false messianic figure. Um, so don't go start following Trump. Because then it says in verse 28, so we skip some verses here, but it says, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. So Trump could be a type of corpse that the vultures, his followers, gather. But the Palestinians too, they like, I don't, like they'll gather around a corpse and kind of promote it and all that kind of stuff. So that could be a fulfillment too of with them. Okay, so they did not know it was coming. Okay, so we already talked about that. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Okay. Oh, this was where I give the list of what happens within an hour connects to the judgment of Babylon. An hour is when the Son of Man comes. An hour is when the thief comes or when the Antichrist comes. And then Jesus in John 4:21 says, an hour is coming when no one will worship in the mountain, neither in the mountain or in Jerusalem. So there's an hour that's coming where there's not worship, a time of worship not happening. And then, we read about the hour being an hour of testing or judgment. Okay. So I think that's the second step. Okay. The judgment of Babylon could be a judgment of America. That's when we see the Son of Man comes. That could connect to the Antichrist or the false Son of Man, which would be Trump, could be Trump, a false messianic figure. So that's what I'm wondering about those. So this is just for your information, judgments that we saw with the different peace deals. Sour grapes. In those days, they will not say again, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Okay, so Trump and Biden try to make these peace deals, and we're the ones that get COVID. The Jews in Israel get thrown into this war. Okay, but God says the days are coming when they won't say that anymore, but everyone will die for his own iniquity, and each man who eats the sour grapes, his teeth will be set on edge. Okay, sounds good. So there's kind of something going on with the number 24. On June 24th last year was when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And 13 months later was when we saw the second and third votes on July 24th of Netanyahu's government trying to overturn the reasonableness clause. Oh, that's what you call it, a clause. Okay. On August 24th was when Trump got his mugs shot. And then September 24th was Yom Kippur Eve. Nothing really significant happened on that day. October 9th was Tishri 24 and Columbus Day, the third day after Hamas attack. I mean, that is the day that Israel kind of started getting on the defensive rather than offensive rather than defensive. Okay, it got turned around on that day. On October 24th, we saw Hamas did a press conference, which was all lies, basically. So what we're seeing, though, I mean, because we're seeing in the book of Haggai, it talks about the second time on the 24th. Okay, so that's kind of why I'm looking at this. On November 8th, so I'm not really sure what would be considered. I mean, if you bring in the Gregorian dates, then you have like 4/24s kind of all together. So it gets kind of confusing that way. Anyways, but we know that November 8th is Chesvan 24. Okay. Because the reason why, because what we see in the book of Daniel is he talks about mourning for 3 weeks. And so that could be Israel's war for like 30 days. Okay. Although it was kind of interesting because we did see Israel after 3 weeks, 21 days, then they started their ground invasion. So that was kind of interesting. But he has kind of this messianic type encounter on the 24th. Okay. So that's why I'm kind of looking at Chesvan 24 to see what happens. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this because I talk about this. These are key dates. Yeah, we won't talk about that. Oh, but I did want to talk about, okay, I saw this on September 11th was Comet Nishimura before dawn. I mean, it was interesting that Biden did his Iran deal on September 11th. That was where he gave Iran $6 billion for like 5 hostages. Okay, not a good deal. He's not a good deal maker. So that was interesting that happened on 9/11. Okay. And 9/11 connects to Biden's birthday too on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, so in Revelation 11, it says, okay, so I highlighted 7. Okay, so it says, verse 7 says, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. Okay, because Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. Okay, so that would be Biden and Netanyahu finishing their testimonies. I mean, I think there's multiple fulfillments because it's kind of connected to Trump and Netanyahu too at some point. But now we're looking at it with Biden and Netanyahu. And then it says their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So we got 2 cities kind of listed there, Sodom and Egypt. So Sodom could connect to Israel. Lot was in Sodom, okay? And then Egypt could connect to America. So it talks about Jesus like being crucified there too. But Anyways, so then it says, I mean, so what's kind of interesting about this too is that, so, oh, sorry, I got a slide coming up where we'll talk about that. Okay, so then it says, those from the people, tribes, tongues, and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. Okay, so looking at their dead bodies for 3.5 days. Okay, okay, so that could connect to the 33 days of the war. Like, 3 would be 30 days and the half day would be the half week or whatever. Um, you know, because what, so looking at their dead bodies for 3.5 days could be a picture of people will not allow Israel to avenge their dead, okay, during these 33 days. But it also could connect to, um, the Palestinians aren't going to bury their dead bodies, during these 33 days because, they're trying to get the world to turn to their side. Okay. And then it says, those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So, we're seeing pro-Palestinian celebrations in various cities. Celebrations. That's funny that I wrote that. Okay. Protests, really. And then the two prophets here could connect to America and Israel. Okay. So I mean, a lot of people, if they're pro-Palestinian, they're going to hate America and Israel. Okay. But then it says after the 3.5 days, so is that after 33 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. So who stands on their feet? So that could connect to the feet of Daniel's statue, that then we're moving into the feet of Daniel's statue. So that could be, resurrection of God's people and resurrection of Trump's people. Um, 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 but also, like I said, I'm not sure if, like, maybe on day 33 we're gonna see Biden or G7 do something on day, because kind of what we've had is like, so Biden and Netanyahu being like the two witnesses, like the people talking about this Saudi deal. It's like during this war, they stopped talking about the well, they didn't really stop, but they, like, it was really kind of put on life support. It was dead kind of during this war. And so I don't know, like if it would be revived in some way afterwards. I'm not sure. Um, but they also say that Netanyahu's kind of like his, like, he probably won't last for long politically because of this war, because of Israel being attacked. So that could be happening too. But then he wouldn't be resurrecting. So those are those verses. Um, and then don't forget, okay, so odious. I talked about this in my last, or one of my last videos. And but we definitely have, okay, so I'm going to skip to verse 25. It came about on the third day when they were in pain that two of Jacob's sons, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city unaware and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth. So this could connect to the Jews in Israel fighting against Hamas. Okay, but so far I've only seen them being able to rescue one hostage. Okay, and it was a woman, but I didn't know if more hostages would be rescued. But then another thought I had was, So the third day when they were in pain, does that connect to Trump's followers? So I had like the third day, like I already talked about November 6th, November 7th. So on November 8th, are Simeon and Levi going to take, like Trump and his followers, are they going to take their sword and come upon the cities unaware, no one knows the day or hour, and kill every male, like go after Biden's people, okay? And kill, because then they kill Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword. That would be like the people, trying to make this deal, trying to trade in the land and all that kind of stuff. Um, um, they took Dinah from Shechem's house, so like taking America from Shechem's house, from Biden's house. And then Jacob's sons came upon the slain and looted the city because they had defiled their sister. That actually connects to God's people when they came out of Egypt. Then, like they looted Egypt or whatever. I mean, they didn't really loot Egypt. I can't think of the word that God used. But they got the riches from Egypt. Okay. Okay, so then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and my men being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household." Um, so Simeon and Levi could be Biden and Netanyahu. They made America and Israel odious among their enemies. I mean, Jacob saying that to them could be Trump, saying to Biden and Netanyahu, "You made us odious." So, um, here's an article. Historians say Trump has been re-educating his followers to embrace violence, and that Matt Gaetz is now doing the same. This historian at NYU accused Trump on Wednesday of encouraging violence. Trump is re-educating his followers, she said, wanting them to see violence in a positive light. She spoke at a conference in New York City. Let's see. An historian and expert on the far right in the United States and abroad is convinced that former President Donald Trump and his MAGA movement are the real deal, a right-wing counter-revolution in the fascist tradition. Speaking Wednesday at a summit, she urged Trump's prosecution in an interview last year with Insider, like in the United States to Chile in the years before a 1973 coup d'etat saw a socialist president overthrown and replaced by a conservative military dictator. The forces of the right in Chile first spent years working to discredit democracy and build an appetite for authoritarian rule, according to, I'll call her Ruth, who teaches at New York University. It's the same kind of campaign she accused Trump of leading himself since he announced his first run for the presidency, setting the stage for the January 6th insurrection with years of aggressive rhetoric. Trump has been re-educating Americans since 2015, using his rallies, events to see violence differently, to see violence in a positive light. He's a superb propagandist, she said, and in his appeals to the baser emotions of resentment and vengeance, he's helped his followers come to view violence as necessary and patriotic. Now there's a connection to a prophecy, or well, a story in the Bible where David, it's like the oh, I forget how it says it in the scripture, but like the underdogs went and followed David. The discontents, followed David. Okay, so I think that could be a prophecy of Trump. The underdog, the discontents, the people in debt, I think is what it says in the scripture about David's followers. Okay, so then she goes on to say, that's why he went to Waco, she said, referring to where Trump rallied his followers in March. Waco is where dozens of cult members died in a confrontation with the FBI under President Bill Clinton, it has ever since been a rallying cry for anti government extremists. That's why he went to the gun store, she continued. The former president said he wanted to buy a Glock handgun, but ultimately, according to his campaign, did not. I don't think he's allowed to. His campaign is a radicalization vehicle. Some certainly took the president's comments on January 6th as a license to storm the U.S. Capitol and try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, having already lost at the ballot box and in the courts. Prosecutors also accused Trump of encouraging violence against anyone involved in the federal case over his efforts to stay in power, intimidating not just court staff but prospective jurors. I mean, that's why they had to put a gag order on him, because he makes threats against the people trying to prosecute him. Violence, Ruth argued, has indeed been normalized in MAGA politics, and it's not just Trump anymore. That's a troubling sign, she said, pointing to a rise in anti democratic thinking. You have extremism that becomes mainstream, she said. We're seeing that in our country. You have violence seen as the only way to change history and move things forward. It's also called like a scorched earth mentality. In August, for example, Florida Republican Matt Gaetz appeared at the Iowa State Fair, where he insisted that only through force do we make any change in a corrupt town like Washington, D.C. So they don't believe anymore that you could just, vote people in and out and try to change the country through your votes. They don't believe in that anymore. Okay, so that, Ruth argued, is a chilling bit of incitement. I read that as him saying, excuse me, elections won't work. Democratic reform doesn't work, she said, but violence does. Trumpism and its allied movements, they're all hitting notes that go back to the original fascist years, she said. Okay, so that article was from 1011. It's kind of interesting. So, let's see, what was I going to say about that? So I definitely think that's true. So I think there's a connection in scripture to the 10 people in the wilderness that didn't have faith. Okay, so they sent the 12 spies to look at the land. Only 2 of them said, we can, God's going to help us get this land. The other 10 said, no, there's giants in the land. They didn't have faith. They didn't trust God. Okay. So if you don't have faith, you're going to end up trying to take matters into your own hands. So that was a good article. So I mean, it's interesting these are from Back to the Future, the 2 pictures. So it's interesting that you got the 9/11 picture and you got the 1330, 133, but then Marty is like the 5. Okay. So Marty returns to the mall at 1:33 a.m. The mall is now called the Lone Pine Mall. So 9/11, so if that connects to, like 9/11 in Israel, the war, the Twin Pines would be like Trump and Netanyahu, being Biden and Netanyahu being the 2 witnesses at that point. And then you have the third guy, which would be Trump. He would be like the Lone Pine, like trying to get rid of Netanyahu and Biden, and then, trying to rise to power. So that could happen on 1335, which, we talked about that number, okay? But it also, the Lone Pine could also connect to Jesus, okay? But we see in the book of Daniel, it talks about like 3 rulers, and Daniel was like the 3rd. So Daniel could be a picture of Trump. So, what's interesting about Marty McFly's name is that it could connect to the 5 foolish virgins and the 5 wise virgins. So the 5, it's interesting that you have 5 foolish virgins and 5 wise virgins, because that could connect to this number 5 that we're waiting for, this day 5, or this dividing of time. Okay. Doc Brown adds up to 8. Oh, I wrote Doc could be Israel, but actually Doc could be Trump because he's the eighth king. They try to kill Doc, but he ends up living. Um, oh, that's interesting. I mean, dual fulfillments, that's what makes this kind of complicated. And so I thought this has all been oh, sorry, I'm talking about something that I got a slide coming up. Okay, so don't go either left or right. So you shall observe to do just as the Lord your God commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right or left. So there's thieves on both sides of Jesus. Both Biden and Netanyahu were wanting to be a part of the Saudi deal, which was kind of interesting because they lean different directions politically. Okay, so that was kind of weird. Okay. Um, so also in scripture, we read about how so for the fall of Jericho, they circled the city for 7 days and then the wall fell flat. Okay. So what was interesting is that we had 7 days of Sukkot where the Jewish people were carrying lulavs on the Temple Mount, and then it's like the wall of Israel fell. Okay. And then Genesis 7:10, which that could connect to October 7th. Okay, when Hamas attacked. It says after 7 days the water of the flood came. Okay. So after the 7 days of Sukkot, the flood, Hamas came. Okay. Other prophecies. So Isaac was 60 when Esau and Jacob were born. Okay. Hamas's attack was 60 days after the Saudi deal, which I'm saying was on that 1290 day, August 9th. Okay. So definitely with Esau and Jacob. Oh, I already said this. The Jacob was like holding the foot, Esau's foot, so he wouldn't step on his head. Okay. We read in the scriptures too the story about Lot being taken captive and then rescued and then by his uncle Abraham, and then Dinah. Oh, we already talked about her story too. She was taken captive and then rescued. The Lot story. Okay, so the Lot, when he was taken captive, that's like the 4 kings against 5. And there's kind of this weird part at the end of that story with Melchizedek, who's definitely a messianic type figure, So I think there's some prophetic shadows of the return of the Messiah in the Lot story. Okay. And Lot was in Sodom. Okay. So I believe that Biden is the beast from the sea. We read about in Revelation the church of Laodicea was rebuked by God for mixing the hot and cold waters. Okay. Because God says, you're going to make me want to spit you out of my mouth. Okay, so Biden sits on the fence. He's trying to support both Israel and the Palestinians, and it's just, you can't do that. It's like, make up your mind. Are you hot or cold? This lukewarm stuff is just gross and disgusting. Okay, that's why God wants to spit him out of his mouth. Okay. Okay, so head of John the Baptist. Okay. Oh, so what's interesting to me is that I think there's a dual fulfillment. What's interesting during this war, it's like, okay, they're wanting the head of it. If John the Baptist is a picture of Israel, they're wanting the head of the Jewish people during this time frame, but they're also wanting the head of Trump during this time frame. Okay, so very interesting. I see dual fulfillments of these scriptures. Okay, so it says, so we'll talk about Israel. For when Herod had John arrested, he bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip. For John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Although Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded John as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod, so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Having been prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." Although he was grieved, the king commanded it to be given because of his oaths and because of his dinner's guest. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took away the body and buried it, and they went and reported to Jesus. Okay, so John had been saying it's not lawful for Herod to have the wife of Herodias. Okay, So that could be a picture of the enemies of Israel did not like Israel making deals with America. Okay. Um, so they didn't like America and Israel kind of mixing, doing things together. Okay. And then it said, although Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded John as prophet. So Iran wanted to put Israel to death, but it is considered sacred by many, so, um, he feared. So Iran obviously fears repercussions because people see Israel as sacred. Okay. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. What's interesting is that Biden's Saudi deal was announced on Obama's birthday on the Hebrew calendar. So then it says, she said, give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist. Hamas was prompted by Iran to attack Israel. So the mother would be like Iran, and then the daughter would be Hamas. Okay. And so Iran would be, asking Hamas to give them the platter of the head of John the Baptist, like, go kill the Jewish people. And then it says, although he was grieved, the king commanded it to be given because of his oaths and because of his dinner guests. I mean, that could be Netanyahu being grieved, because, anyways, and he sent and had John beheaded in the prison. Okay, it's a little fuzzy, but, so Israel was attacked by Hamas. His head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took away the body and buried it, and they went and reported to Jesus. So, we saw that Hamas did behead some of the Jewish people. It's just gross. And I don't like to think about it and talk about it. And then, but we had Israel carefully trying to bury the bodies. Okay. So that's that fulfillment. But then with Trump, so I think we're seeing a dual fulfillment because we're seeing two things happen kind of at the same time. Okay. So now in America, they're wanting the head of Trump on a platter. Okay. For when Herod had John arrested, so that would be Trump's indictments, okay, which started at Passover. Okay. For John had been saying to him, it is not lawful for you to have her. So Trump has been telling Biden that he, with the election, okay, that it wasn't lawful for Biden to be president, okay. And then, although Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded John as prophet. So we do have people in America that regard Trump as a prophet, okay. And, so maybe Biden's afraid of, okay, what's going to happen if they try to arrest Trump, okay. But when Herod's birthday came, so what was interesting about that is that Nisan 13 was Trump's first indictment. That is actually the date of Haman's decree, okay, to kill the Jews, okay. And then we'll skip down. So he sent and had John beheaded. So then we had Herodias dancing, could be a picture of the courts in America, doing a good job of, these indictments for Trump, okay? And then, so then he sent and had John beheaded in the prison. So it talks about Haman gets hung on the gallows made for Mordecai. So this verse could be talking about a reversal with Trump and Biden. So maybe the person that really gets beheaded is Biden, okay? And then his head gets buried. Okay. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. So if we see Israel burning on the one side and America burning on the other side, we're out of time. So like we're already seeing Israel burning, so we're getting close to being out of time. So I'm looking at my notes to make sure I said everything I wanted to say. One other thing is Pharaoh, Biden could be Pharaoh, because he's been, like, it's just interesting that everybody wants to tell Israel how to fight this war. Okay, like even Russia, who's like fighting, Putin, even Putin, who's fighting a war in Ukraine, all of a sudden thinks he's self righteous and could tell Israel how they should fight, or they should have a ceasefire or whatever, like, whatever, preach to yourself. Um, I mean, it's just a fascinating world right now. It's so bizarre. Um, but Biden's been pressuring. I mean, we had this problem. Like, there was another war earlier that Netanyahu was in charge of, and I mean, at that point, um, Netanyahu wanted to get rid of Hamas, but they made him do a ceasefire. So now I think he's pretty, like, wanting to really make it happen this time. Um, but I don't know how well. There's so much pressure from the world. I don't know how that would work. So what we have is Biden would be Pharaoh, where he's saying, let the people get back to work. Okay. Um, Everyone wants to kind of get back to where it was. Okay. The status quo in Israel. Okay. Which is really unsustainable for the Jewish people. Okay. It's just not a good lifestyle for the Jewish people with, and like I said, they got attacks coming from all directions. Okay. I mean, there's terrorists that live in the West Bank. So there's attacks from Palestinians from within the country. There's, attacks from, so Lebanon's, ever since this war started, they've been getting some attacks from Hezbollah up north. Gaza's down in the south. They've been continuing to send rockets all through this war. Like I said, the Houthis in Yemen are lobbing things over. There's been some rockets from um, the proxies of Iran in Syria, sending stuff from Syria. So I mean, Israel's got a lot of enemies. So it's really a sad situation. Um, so but that's my thoughts on it. We'll have to see what happens. So like I said, keep an eye on, tomorrow night, the the what is it, the 8th and then to the 9th, could be a oh, the other thing I wanted to say too was, what was interesting is, all the weekends of October all had signs in the sky. So like a week after the war was when, on October 14th, was the Ring of Fire solar eclipse. October 21st was, they had the Oranids from Halley's Comet, doing shooting stars from midnight to early dawn on the 21st. On the 28th was, the Hunter's moon, and there actually was a partial solar eclipse, although we couldn't see that in America. And then this past weekend was, do I have that written down here? Okay. Oh, well, so I guess I didn't have anything for like the weekend of November 4th and 5th. Oh, no, I did. Okay, November 5th to the 6th were the peak nights for the Southern Torrid meteor shower. Okay. Um, oh yeah, I'm looking at the wrong weekend. And then the 11th to the 12th is the peak nights of the Northern Torrid shower. Okay. With the Torrids connect to the bull. Okay. So it's kind of interesting that kind of frames this week that we're in. So it's interesting that we're switching kind of from the southern to the northern. Okay. Because south could connect to, the Jewish people in Israel, and then the north could connect to North America. So fascinating. Definitely so much going on. So, so hopefully this was helpful to kind of give you an idea of what God's up to these days. So, but the bottom line is, so we read in Daniel is to wait, until, I mean, basically we just need to wait till the Messiah comes. Okay. And I think he's right at the door. Oh, I didn't bring up those verses because it says, when you see the armies in Jerusalem, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. I forget which, like, if that's in Luke or something like that. So you could look that up, armies in Jerusalem. So I mean, I definitely think, the Messiah is near, right at the door. Um, so I don't know if there's anything I want to say about that. Okay, so tried to cover a lot. There's so many prophecies being fulfilled in these days. So be careful who you listen to. I mean, some people are still not really seeing this as anything significant. They just think it's another conflict in Israel, just like all the previous ones. But really, I think this was the peace and safety war. Okay. um, so anyways, so thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you listening. So God bless.